I will fill your fertile little tonight. Stop it. If you woke up one morning and decided that you wanted to write corn with your sister, would you let your parents read it? Because that is exactly what the authors of these books did. I don't know if I can start a video that way, but I guess I just did. Hello and welcome. My name is Rachel, and one of the best things about having a YouTube channel is that I'm free to voice my opinions whenever I like. And when it comes to this book series, boy do I have some opinions. May from Goodreads characterised this book as, "What in the homie hopping Wattpad wolf book did I just read?" And when I read that, I just thought, same May. Same. My feelings about this book series are complicated. Now, I can't hide from the fact that I read all 3 books and I did not consider DNFing, but I definitely felt my time had been somewhat wasted. If you decide to give this series a go, please by all means check the trigger warnings and be warned that you are in for a long read. Before I cover the plot, characters and writing, I want to just say a couple of things that I think are worth noting about these books. By the way, this video is going to contain a lot of spoilers. The first thing I want to address is the slightly incestuous vibe of the writing setup of these books. These books are written by a sister duo. Let that sink in. While you let it sink in, consider this. Would you tell your sister your darkest, deepest sexual fantasies? I think no. Now listen, I don't have a sister, so maybe I just don't know what's normal. It's possible that this makes me deeply uncomfortable because I'm not used to the kind of relationships that sisters have with each other. But even if that is the case, I do find a sister duo writing corn slightly inappropriate. In the back of the second book, the sisters write, "To Mum and Dad for reading everything." Everything? They let their parents read this smut? They are comfortable with their parents knowing that their brains crafted this sentence. "He laps the head of my teal gaze shining. His tongue runs over my purling tip and he groans." Or how about this? "You've got the of a god. I love being stuffed full of this godly." Or my personal favourite, where one of the characters creates an ice dildo and promptly uses it to fuck the heroine. In his hands is a large icicle, but with a rounded tip. This is then described as being monstrous. Or this. "He grips my hips, pulling me down so my wet slides against the length of his Can you fathom being comfortable with your parents knowing that your brain can even create this sentence, let alone asking them to read it? Now, there are some good things about these books. First of all, the covers and the art is stunning. The beautiful world map on the inside of the cover is genuinely gorgeous. And I'm not here to shit on every single thing they've done, just the stuff that deserves it. And there are some parts which are questionable. Plus, I'm here to offer critique, so expect criticism. But who am I to talk? I can only offer my opinion. My credentials for critiquing this series are 1 creative writing module during my philosophy degree. So Virginia Woolf, I am not, but I do have some thoughts and I am going to share them because hey, no one can stop me. Now, something which gets mentioned a lot in the world of books is DNFing. This means you read a book and you literally can't finish it. It can be because the book is so crap or because you just can't get through it for whatever reason, be it the characters, plot, annoying writing style. Here are some examples of books that I DNF'd. And listen, the Beasts of the Briar series is by no means amazing literature, but did I consider DNFing? To be honest, no, not really. Although my review is heavily scathing, I never truly considered putting the book down. Partially because I'd spent £45 buying them all, and I figured if I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a fucking pound. Let's get into the meat of the review. With reference to the plot, I have some thoughts. If you enjoy knowing what is going to happen and then waiting 600 pages for it to actually happen, you might enjoy this series. That is to say, it's quite predictable. The main character's mother disappears 25 years ago, and it just so happens that the princes were cursed 25 years ago. As a reader, it's immediately obvious that the enchantress and the queen and the heroine's mother are all the same person. Our heroine, Rosalina, who I imagine looking like an older, sexy, curvy version of the girl from Brave, is unbelievably head over heels in love with all 4 princes. We know from the beginning that these princes will all turn out to be her mates, but we're still expected to be surprised when this fact gets revealed. I think these books rely a lot on the readers using some form of intuition so that the authors aren't forced to use their dodgy exposition skills. I did find it frustrating that you spend a whole lot of the book just waiting for the thing that you know is going to happen to actually happen. Now, this isn't necessarily bad, And it can be satisfying in its own way, but more in the sense that it makes you feel like you can read the future rather than because it's actually good plot structuring. Although the plot is messy, convoluted, and in my opinion quite poor, it was still relatively gripping. The authors do manage to grip you into their strange world of fantasy fucking and morally grey characters with questionable magical abilities. And you do want to know what the ending is going to be, so the fact that I didn't DNF is genuinely something of a compliment. I did read it, and the next one, and the next one, and if you ask me if I've pre-ordered the fourth one, well, my Amazon history speaks for itself. A qualm that I've seen people who review this book have is that it's too long. Somebody on Goodreads also said that it's really obvious where one sister stops writing and another sister picks up the writing, and that the sisters need an editor who can kind of like blend their two writing styles together. But I actually don't agree with that. Some scenes were repetitive and definitely pointless. But does the length of the books annoy me personally? Not really. I do think that the words in a novel should kind of almost fight for their place on the page, and you should feel that the author's gone in and edited and ruthlessly cut and changed and put the words in that really say what they want to say. But this work does feel like every single thought that fell out of each author's head onto the page just stayed there unedited. In my opinion, this leads to the plot feeling convoluted, complex, and lacking in direction. As for the plot of each book individually, this book is one long case of blue balls. If you're creating a, let's be honest, fantasy world as an excuse for a fuckfest, there better be some serious fucking. In my opinion, this book lacked that. Sure, we get some spicy gay scenes between Farron and Dayton, and don't get me wrong, those were appreciated. But when we have a main character who is as, let's be honest, thirsty as Rosie is, I really feel like that itch needs to be scratched. One of the most frustrating themes in this particular book was Kel's bargain with Caspian and how much that was harped on about. It's heavily hinted that whatever bargain Kel has made with Caspian is going to mean that Rosie ends up with Caspian. So whatever the bargain was, it's not looking good for Kel and Rosie. So when the bargain is eventually revealed, it almost doesn't matter what it was. We already knew that it was bad news and was keeping Rosie and Kel apart, and that is annoying in itself. Kel's always pushing Rosie away and pulling her back and pushing her away and pulling her back, and it was tiring. And the ending of book 2 is where I really started to have my problem with the magic. Rosie's magic pops up and saves the day at the end, and as relieving as this is, it's quite tiring how she keeps having her magic, then losing it, then having it, then losing it. Where is it? I'll circle back to this point in a minute. When it comes to book 3, I don't know what back from the dead bullshit was happening with this bad guy Quellos, but it's like he's the main problem in the story, but actually he's not the main problem because he's introduced at the beginning of the book as being back and he's going to cause all these issues, but then he hardly ever does. This instalment is where the plot gets really, really complicated. We've got the mysterious green flame magic, the tense relationship between Ezra and his brother, the tense relationship between Caspian and his sister, Rosie's dad gallivanting off across the realm trying to find her mum, who, by the way, is so obvious is the missing queen. We have the flowers and the bargain and Caspian's obsession with Rosie and Rosie's obsession with everyone. We have the mating bond and the mysterious weapons and the big opening down into the below full of awful monsters. We have the necklaces and the nightingale and Sira, the queen of the below. I mean, seriously, how many plot points are they trying to squeeze into one book? It's a lot. When I signed up for a Beauty and the Beast reimagining full of threesomes, I did not expect to have to delve so deeply into such a convoluted plot. All I want is for Rosie and Cal to fuck, and it's 3 books in and it still hasn't happened. I wanted fairy porn, not the entire plot of EastEnders. There were 2 parts in the 3rd book which I actually felt were done really well. The first is Caspian's character development. Although it lacks some subtlety, I still feel that the authors managed to develop Caspian and give him some interesting backstory. He's tortured, he's morally grey, but maybe he's also kind of good. Of all of the princes, he's definitely the one that I'm the most interested in. You know when you read a book and an actor from a certain movie just becomes that person in your head? For me, the Prince of Thorns became Warren Peace from Sky High. It was like a 2005 movie from years ago. Half of you probably haven't even seen it. But Warren Peace was like this good baddie who could make fire out of his hands, and he was, let's be honest, quite hot. So anytime I imagine the Prince of Thorns in my head, it's Warren Peace from Sky High. When we discover that Caspian is Rose's mate at the end of book 3, I admit I'm quite chuffed. The second scene in book 3 that genuinely really hit home for me, I don't know what it was about it, but it was well done, was when Ezrin is being publicly shamed by his brother and has his ears cut off. He's marched through the city having vegetables thrown at him, and I appreciated how, although it was a little bit clunky, they did manage to emote that really nicely. And it made perfect sense for Ezrin to give up his title because of his honour. It was very congruent to his character. And I appreciated how Kell stops Rosie from jumping in and saving Ezrin, because he needed to go through that process, because that was true to him. And I did like that it felt so genuine to what Ezrin would actually do in that situation. But Kell being able to stop Rosie from saving Ezrin in this situation segues really nicely into my next issue with this series. There is an unwritten rule in fantasy writing that if there's going to be magic, it needs to be constrained. It needs to have rules and follow them. We see this attempted in Harry Potter. We know some basic parameters for the magic. People can't be brought back from the dead. You apparently can't create money. We learn that magic needs to be learned and honed and built up like any other skill. In order for magic to be palatable, at least for me, it needs to follow its own rules. Even in the Disney film Aladdin, the genie starts out by telling Aladdin the rules of the magic. No wishing for more wishes, he can't make anybody fall in love with anybody else, and absolutely no bringing anyone back from the dead. Having rules that constrains magic makes the work more believable, and it makes it follow its own structure, which I think is really important in fantasy writing. You have to know where the lines are. But this is absolutely not the case in this series. Rosie's magic is absolutely tapped. It appears suddenly when she needs to save the prince's lives, but not every time. She can feel it sometimes and not others, and the author's attempt to describe this is, in my opinion, laughable. At the end of the second book, Rosie needs to pull on her magic to save the princes, and it's heavily implied that any distress the princes are in will help Rosie find her magic. So why can't she find it when Ezrin's having his powers ripped away and his ears cut off? In the first book, all she has to do is think, man, I wish that window was wider so I could fit out of it, and suddenly the window grows. There are other places where this happens too, like towards the end of the third book, when Dayton is trying to show Renly how to use magic. She's lived all her life believing that she has no magic, but all the Summer Prince has to do is whisper a few choice words and suddenly, bam, there it is. In my opinion, it's just not great. Casting the plot aside for a second, let's talk about the characters. Not everyone has the same issue that I do with this book, but somebody from Goodreads called Ridhi does. I don't think I'll be continuing this series. Every single character infuriates me. I can kind of empathise with this. One of the main issues with this series is that every single character is just a massive cliche. I do appreciate that one of the hardest things to do in a Why Choose romance is create enough differentiation between each of the love interests to keep that feeling of freshness in the story, to show that each of these four princes are different. They do manage to do this. In some ways, the princes are nice and different from each other, but they do it by creating an unbelievable amount of cliche. In my opinion, the princes are total caricatures of themselves. Sure, Farron is giving Clark Kent nerd with low self-confidence, and Kell is giving alpha male obsessed with sex, but he is just Henry Cavill in The Witcher. Dayton might be playful, distant, and hard to pin down with a sweet core, and Ezrin is your typical honour-driven, old-fashioned prince. But at the end of the day, these characters are basically all the same. They all think the same, talk the same, they all have huge cocks, and they all want to fuck Rosie. There's absolutely no differentiation between the basic stream of consciousness way that they're expressed on the page. An example of a book that doesn't do this is The Teacher by Frida McFadden. This book has dual narrators, but you can clearly tell which character is speaking at which time. If you were to open this book on a random page, you'd be able to tell by the way that it's written who is speaking. Now, don't get me wrong, Frida McFadden is no Ernest Hemingway, but it's certainly better than this. Sometimes I would forget who was narrating and have to flip back to the beginning of the chapter to check. A point that I don't want to linger on too much, but that I do feel is worth saying, is that Rosie is awful. Rosie doesn't say anything interesting when she describes the princes. She describes their hair, their eyes, the size of their penis. As a character, she's an unbelievable blend of weak and strong, or confident and shy. She's sometimes fearful, sometimes brave, and it's never clear what triggers this change in her. Her stream of consciousness is, let's be honest, quite dull. She seems to suddenly realise things that she should have realised ages before. Rosie doesn't seem to be able to fathom that all four princes, 5 if you count Caspian, are all her mate. It's so obvious to the reader, but Rosie doesn't seem to be able to catch up. It's very clear that no jealousy exists between Rosie and all 5 princes. However, jealousy is present when Rosie is depicted with other men, hence making it quite clear that there is something going on between these people. And now we come to the pièce de résistance of this book, the one thing which, if nailed, can save a dull, drab plot and make it important and meaningful. I'm talking, of course, about the writing. Now, listen, authors don't owe us anything. They can produce whatever work they like, and if there is an audience for it and it sells and they've been successful, then they've succeeded. An amazing example of this is the 50 Shades of Grey series. Those books are known for being repetitive and frankly crap, but they were unbelievably successful, so does that make them good? In my opinion, writing is an art form, and like any other kind of art form, there's no yardstick for it to be measured by. What makes it good to one person can be the very thing that makes it flawed to somebody else. I might love Gustav Klimt's The Kiss, but when somebody else looks at it, all they can see is how out of proportion the woman's legs are. No one has much of a right to say that any particular work is inherently bad, but you will notice throughout this video that I have called some things bad. This is because, in my opinion, the writing in this book left a whole lot to be desired. When you learn to write, you get taught things to spice up your writing, like similes, metaphors, onomatopoeia, show not tell. I feel like these authors learned what they were meant to do. They learned how to write, and they try to do that, but they lack that kind of inherent flair or skill, which in some writers is really present. I sense that the editing process, although probably quite long and professionally done, was not enough to make these women seem like they can write. I guess you can't polish a turd. This is all my opinion, and I'm not claiming here that what I'm saying is inherently true. I just feel that my tiny subjective view on this is that this writing is poor. A few choice examples of this are in book 1. I haven't plummeted to my death Mufasa style yet, so that's something. And this passage in book 2. Kneel before me. I do, sitting on my heels on the soft bed, caged by his huge legs. Da-da-da-da-da. My heart races and I stare at his throbbing form. This is the first time I've truly been able to take in the High Prince of Winter. Thick veins curve up his length, and I imagine running my tongue along each one, tasting the sweetness. My breath quickens as I fight the urge to pounce on it. Can authors who write such crappy, cringy lines truly be considered good? But as the cover of the book states, it has become a TikTok sensation, so maybe the answer is yes. Now listen, it isn't all bad, but there are some things which characterise the writing as being, in my opinion, particularly lacking. A huge one is the bloody repetition. Anytime Rosie gets down and dirty with one of the princes, they will always make a sound which is described as purely male. Anytime a penis is described, it's always beading or purling. His tip shimmers with a pearl of pre-cum. I mean, seriously? Maybe it's because I'm as gay as the day is long, so I just don't understand it, but is pre-cum sexy? Do you know what I think of when I hear the words pre-cum? Condom. Further infuriating repetition includes during most sex scenes when people get spun or span. There's just rampant lazy repetition throughout the entire book. Another example of this is that everything Rosie wears is thin. The authors don't even bother mixing up the adjectives. They want us to understand that Rosie is close to being naked all the time. Almost all the fight scenes include Rosie ending up having her clothes ripped. Another small thing that bugs me is how the authors have tried to make colloquialisms, like fey sayings almost. They use phrases like stars and gods instead of oh my god or goodness me. A character will say 7 realms or stars above and bones below, and I don't know, it's just kind of cringe. I understand the point of this, it's for world building. It's trying to make the fae seem like they have their own phrases. I mean, if the fae princes used phrases like oh my god or what the hell, it would take us out of the fantasy. But my issue with what the authors have done here is they still use English language colloquialisms, just tweaked slightly. They've changed them to make them slightly weirder, but they're still obviously inspired by English sayings. For example, in book 2, where Ezrin says stars above and bones below, it's clearly just a reimagining of the English language saying God above. This would have worked if they had committed entirely and made like completely new and random sayings that were totally, didn't make sense to us at all, but were just new for that fae world. But in my opinion, what they have done is an awkward half-assed attempt at that, and it just comes off as really bad and cringy. Another massive gripe that I have with the writing of this book is there are some phrases that are just like, what the fuck? He's like a slab of marble, and I can't wait to start carving. Long have I ached to touch these beautiful breasts. I will fill your fertile little pussy tonight. Stop it. In my opinion, it's just poor writing, lazy, and just kind of icky. Now this is not always the case. There's a beautiful scene where Rose arrives in the Spring Realm and she's describing what she can see. A majestic cityscape sprawls around us, overlooked by a towering mountain range that seems to scrape the very sky itself. The metropolis is infused with ornate buildings, wrought iron balconies, and colourful pastel-hued facades. The streets, made of cobblestone, are admired with lush gardens, where bubbling fountains and decorative tilework make them appear as serene oases. the beautiful buildings are all made of a brilliant pink stone. I like that. I thought that was beautiful. It shows that they are capable of writing lovely things. They just get lazy in places. With all this criticism being said, I do have to answer the question of why did I finish them? Something gripped me. Something made me stay. Something was entertaining enough that not only did I read all 3 when I have a massive pile of books I need to read, I also have pre-ordered the 4th one. I've justified it to myself as such. I read different books for different reasons. In order to enjoy a series like this with a messy plot and repetitive characters, I slightly have to turn off my brain and just enjoy. It's like eating an entire tub of Ben & Jerry's in one go. You know it's wrong, but if you turn off that tiny voice in your head, it feels right. Jodie on Goodreads says, y'all are absolutely tweaking. This book was shockingly bad. I desperately need you all to stop promoting and liking these books with stream of consciousness writing. I've said this once and I'll say it again. It's bad for world building. It creates an extremely narrow narrative. I understand that not everyone reads books for their writing technicality, but there does have to be a line drawn eventually. You cannot let writing like this continuously get published just because the demand is high. You're better off reading fan fiction on Wattpad. Now, I find this viewpoint interesting. Jodie says, you cannot let writing like this continuously get published just because demand is high. But I say, why not? Whilst I agree the writing is crap, who cares? The publication of this book in no way takes away from the effectiveness or the beauty of the publication of other books. For example, this one by Jenny Cavell, which in my opinion is a masterpiece. Isn't that the point of art, that we get to choose what we engage with? I do agree that in order to enjoy a book like this, I kind of have to turn off the tiny critic in my head and give the authors a lot of slack. But I'm okay with doing that when I know that that's what I'm going to be doing. But possibly the problem that people like Jodie have with work like this is just good old-fashioned jealousy. It's like those TikTokers who make thousands of dollars making videos of themselves dipping pickles in mustard. It's not good content, it's not important, it's certainly not deep, but it is popular, and maybe that's enough. A 1-star review that I saw on Goodreads characterises this really nicely. It was a bad retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I saw it on Kindle Unlimited and just decided to read it. It reminded me of a 10-year-old's diary, but I read it all on my Kindle and stayed up way too late. This review, in my opinion, sums up this work perfectly. It's almost so bad that it's good. Because for all the things I've moaned about, all the crappy dialogue, repetition, cringy, mediocre world building, I still wouldn't put it down. And isn't that what art is sort of about? Enjoyment. Losing your head in a world that would never and could never really exist. Rushing down to the below in a cloud of thorns. Or riding across a beautiful autumn scenescape on the back of a moose. Being fucked with an ice dildo. Wait, isn't that what reading is all about? Losing your head in a world that you've never been to before. And haven't they done that well? I have to admit that I will read the rest of the books, and I will base my final opinion about whether this is a good series or not on whether we get a sixen with Rosie being spit roasted by Kel and Caspian and Ezrin and Farron, all of the princes. I'm not gonna lie to you, I want a 6-man fuckfest. So for all their hilarious plot holes and terrible, terrible threesomes, perhaps Elizabeth and Helen are onto something here. Something lucrative and popular and just a little bit fucked. Thank you for listening to my opinions on this series. I would love to hear what opinions you guys have. If there are any books you've enjoyed that you think I might like or that you'd like to see me review, pop them down in the comments. There are some weird books out there, and boy do I want to read them. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next time. Bye!